Do you strive to be perfect? Odds are that's not going to work out for you. I spent the early part of my life being a perfect student and believing somehow that that would make me loved and appreciated. Of course, finally, I had to acknowledge that I was imperfect, I still am imperfect, and I'm going to die imperfect, even though I will continue to try to grow and improve along the way. Based on a lifetime of relevant education and experiences, my guest today challenges us to be open-hearted and forgiving enough to love ourselves despite our imperfections, so that we can live well and, just as important, die well. Have you thought about this in your own life? Hi, this is Marlena Fiol from Becoming Who We Truly Are, a YouTube channel that deepens our understanding of who we are and what's possible for us. If you find value in this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Doing so makes a big difference. And for a look at my personal path to finding my calling, we recommend my memoir recently released by Mango Publishing, Nothing Bad Between Us. I'm thrilled and privileged to introduce today's guest, Dr. Ira Byock. Ira is a leading palliative care physician, author, and public advocate for improving care through the end of life. He's been involved in hospice and palliative care since 1978, and over the years he's received way too many awards and honors for me to even begin to name here. He's authored numerous peer-reviewed academic articles on the ethics and practice of care, and he's the author of 3 award-winning books. In this interview, I draw on Ira's first book, Dying Well, which has become a standard in the field of hospice and palliative care. Here's a peek at what you'll hear from Ira, and I quote, "Most people believe that the fundamental nature of illness and dying is medical. And I would say that's where we get things wrong to begin with. Obviously, people who are seriously ill and dying have medical issues that are incredibly important. But the fundamental nature of illness and dying is personal, emotional, social, interpersonal, and spiritual." If you'd like to listen to my hour-long interview with Dr. Byock, I've posted the link to the web address below. And at the end of this episode, we'll provide recommendations for additional material on dying and the process of awakening at the end of life. Ira, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Marlena.
So you write that you didn't learn what you needed to know about the care of dying in medical school or in your residency training. What led to your calling to follow this path? And where did you learn what you needed to know to do it well?
I think those are 2 separate questions. I'll start with my calling, quote unquote. I didn't realize for a while. I was in residency and realized that the quality of care and the amount of attention given to patients who were felt to be dying was somehow significantly less than the time and attention we gave to everybody else. And that seemed not only peculiar and frankly a lapse in kind of medical quality, but a social injustice. They're just folks and they're just dying. but you know, they still have feelings and hopes and concerns, and you know, it seemed like something was seriously wrong that I had to respond to. And so in taking action around specific patients, and I think in paying attention and being kind of brutally honest with myself, I realized that there was work that needed to be done here. Later on, at least 15 years later, when I was writing Dying Well, I realized that the real basics of what I needed to know came from what I learned from my parents, frankly, in their care of my maternal grandmother, little Grandma Leah, who had a stroke who needed full-time care. And there was no question. She wasn't going to a nursing home. She was coming home with us. And I was like 7 or I don't know, no more than 9 at the time. But Grandma Leah lived with us. My mom shouldered the largest portion of the load as a woman, frankly, and her daughter. But my dad was also involved in even fairly intimate aspects of her care. I learned from their actions, not from their words, that my grandmother had inherent dignity. She was a whole person who had been diminished because of the stroke in her ability to communicate and to care for herself, but not in her personhood.
Yeah, my father was a medical missionary in Paraguay, and he treated leprosy. And what you are saying almost brings tears to my eyes, because he's no longer with us, but those would have been his words about those patients. Don't you dare call them lepers. They are dignified, whole people with a disease called leprosy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to be clear for our listeners, the objective of both hospice and palliative care is pain and symptom relief, but I think the prognosis and goals of care may be different.
I think the goals of palliative care and hospice are to improve comfort and quality of life of the people who are sick and those who love them, and that's more accurate. But as your question kind of reflected, I think the general public and so many of my medical colleagues see hospice and palliative care as being, oh yeah, you're the folks who treat pain when somebody's dying. Well, yeah, we kind of are, but that's hardly all we do, and it's not actually the main reason why we're needed. I mean, it is an enabling mechanism. If we didn't treat pain, and this is what I saw way back in Fresno, if you don't treat pain, people will suffer. If you treat it badly, people will suffer. If you do, just give them competent medical attention for their pain and their bowels and their skin care and their oral care and helping them eat and drink and eliminate and all that, then they have time and attention to devote to what's most important in their lives, not just in their physiology. They can look at. We often say in palliative care, it's not just what's the matter with you; it's what matters most to you.
Yeah. So healing physical pain is clearly the responsibility of the physician, but I hear you saying that as a physician, it is also your responsibility to help patients heal their emotional pain.
Where I would start, Marlena, is to say that most physicians are taught and believe, and the general public goes along with it, that kind of the fundamental nature of illness and dying is medical. And I would say that's where we get things wrong to begin with. That obviously people who are seriously ill and dying have medical issues that are incredibly important and are essential, but that the fundamental nature of illness and dying is personal. It is only partly medical. If one does not attend to the fundamental human needs of people, the biology, right? Eating and drinking, shelter from the elements, elimination, skin care, all of that, pain, then it becomes only medical. But as soon as you do that, then you have people have available to them opportunities to attend to the personal. And within the realm of the personal, emotional, social, interpersonal, spiritual, people have the capacity to suffer, absolutely, but they also have the capacity for well-being. That's what drew me to the calling. I kept thinking to myself, if somebody looks me in, if I say, Mr. Rodriguez, how are you doing today? And he looks me in the face and says, hi, Dr. Byock, I'm well. Thank you. How are you doing? Right? So what the hell does that mean? You know, well, when I first heard people say that, I thought, well, sure, you know, it's the morphine. He's feeling a little euphoric. But after a while, I realized maybe they are feeling well within themselves, despite the unwanted circumstances of knowing that they're at the very end of their lives. And since we are more than our bodies, you know, and since Maslow and Erickson and Piaget all told us that human development was a lifelong process, maybe human potential persists even this period of life we call dying. By its very definition, being a whole person requires us to acknowledge that we're imperfect, right? We are not called to be perfect. We are just human. And that's enough. Part of being well within oneself, for me, and I think it's true in general, is the ability to accept that one is not perfect, to acknowledge our imperfections, to continue to hopefully work on our imperfections, but we're going to die imperfect, right? And one has to, I think, be open and open-hearted and forgiving enough with oneself to accept and love oneself despite our imperfection. But the fact of the matter is, human well-being and dying are not incompatible. Not everybody, certainly by no means, achieves a sense of well-being or is blessed with that as they're dying. But darn it, it happens. Sometimes people change quite a lot during the months, weeks, and days that we would consider them to have been dying. They get over themselves in some regards. They let go of certain assumptions or expectations. Sometimes they come to accept some of the things that they have been unproud of, ashamed of. They accept their own imperfections. They forgive themselves. Sometimes people reconcile with their former spouse or the child that they've been at odds with for years, or a sibling, sister or brother that they've been fighting with. And in so doing, their living experience changes in ways that are deeply meaningful to them and maybe to others as well. My second book, frankly, is called The 4 Things That Matter Most, and I used those 5 statements: please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. The last one being, and goodbye. Well, it turns out you don't have to be dying or to even say goodbye. If you can feel like you have asked for forgiveness, offered forgiveness, expressed gratitude and love, even if you were to die suddenly, there would be less important things left unsaid.
So my father and I had a very broken relationship for a long time, and the title of my book, Nothing Bad Between Us, those words in Low German, which is our native tongue, are "Do es nichts zwischen uns." And those were the words that we said to each other at every goodbye for the last couple of decades of his life. And they really encapsulate, and I never thought about that until this moment, but they encapsulate all of that. I forgive you, forgive me, thank you, and I love you. Do es nichts zwischen uns. And to be able to say those words to a loved one, especially when it's been a broken relationship, is so powerful. Ira, if there were one last thing that you'd like our listeners to hear, what would it be?
Human potential persists through the very end of life. And so that really, from my perspective, it should be the next big thing in American culture, that this phenomenal realization that well-being is possible through the very end of life. That's culture changing.
This has been a rich and meaningful conversation. Ira, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
It's such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for asking.
If you found value in this episode, please do give it a thumbs up. And please post any comments or questions you might have for me. I am interested and I'll respond each day. For example, how are you thinking about your own process of death and dying? In addition, just so you know, I'll be posting a new episode of this YouTube show each Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. For further information on dying well, we recommend the following resources. First, a TED Talk by B.J. Miller on what really matters at the end of life. Also, check out my interview with Dr. Lavera Crawley about the value of spiritual companionship at the end of life. And for a look at my personal path to forgiveness and reconciliation with my father before he died, we recommend my memoir, which was released in 2020 by Mango Publishing, Nothing Bad Between Us. The web addresses for each of these resources are in the show notes. And remember, we are together on this journey.